The scorching Atlanta sun beat down on the cracked pavement as Officer Travis and Officer Cole leaned against their patrol car, sipping their coffee and exchanging crude jokes. It had been a slow day, and they were itching for something entertaining. That was when they spotted a black man walking confidently down the sidewalk, dressed in casual but neat attire. He had an air of authority about him, but to the two officers, he was just another random guy who needed to be put in his place. They didn't know his name, nor did they care. To them, he was just another nobody in their city. With a smirk, Officer Travis nudged his partner, and within seconds, their flashing lights illuminated the street. The man, James Carter, stopped in his tracks, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly as the officers stepped out of their vehicle. "What's the problem, officers?" he asked, his voice even and controlled. "Hands where we can see them," Officer Cole barked, completely ignoring the question. James sighed but complied. He knew how this worked. He had seen it before. The officers closed in, their hands resting on their holsters. "What's a guy like you doing in this neighborhood?" Travis sneered. Walking, James replied simply, refusing to let them intimidate him. "Oh, so now we got a smartass," Cole chuckled, shaking his head. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for." "Really? And what's that description?" James asked, his patience wearing thin. "Tall, black, and up to no good," Travis replied with a smirk. James clenched his jaw but remained calm. "You do realize this is racial profiling, don't you?" Travis scoffed. "You gonna teach us the law now?" Cole took out his baton and tapped it against his palm. "How about we take you somewhere quiet so you can answer our questions properly?" Before James could respond, the officers grabbed him roughly, twisting his arms behind his back and pushing him toward a nearby telephone pole. A small crowd started to gather as they watched the scene unfold. The officers shoved James against the pole and, in an act of pure humiliation, tied his hands behind his back using their police zip ties, laughing as they did. "Look at you now," Travis taunted. "Not so tough now, huh?" The bystanders murmured amongst themselves, some recording on their phones, but no one dared to intervene. This was the kind of thing that happened all too often in this part of the city. James, despite his predicament, remained composed. He didn't fight back. He didn't yell. He simply looked at the two officers with a gaze so cold it made Travis shift uncomfortably. "You two have just made the biggest mistake of your lives," James said, his voice calm but firm. Travis laughed. "Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" James smirked, shaking his head. "You'll find out soon enough." Cole rolled his eyes. Yeah, whatever. You just sit tight while we figure out what we want to do with you." At that moment, a sleek black SUV turned the corner and pulled up alongside the scene. The doors swung open, and out stepped a man in a crisp suit, followed by two uniformed officers with serious expressions. The crowd shifted, whispering amongst themselves. "Officer Travis." "Officer Cole," the suited man said, his tone laced with authority. The two cops straightened up immediately. Chief Reynolds, sir." "What brings you here?" Chief Reynolds crossed his arms and stared at them for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he pointed to James. "Untie him." "No." The officers hesitated, but the look in Reynolds' eyes told them not to argue. With shaking hands, they cut the zip ties, freeing James. And then, as realization dawned upon them, their faces turned ghostly pale. "Allow me to introduce you to your new police chief," Reynolds said, his voice thick with disdain. "James Carter." The entire street went silent. The officers' smug grins vanished in an instant. James rubbed his wrists, then stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto the two officers who had just humiliated him in broad daylight. "Now," he said, his tone ice cold, "let's talk about what happens next." The moment James Carter's identity was revealed, the tension in the air became unbearable. Officers Travis and Cole, who had spent the last 20 minutes humiliating the man they thought was just another black pedestrian, now stood frozen in place, their minds scrambling for an explanation, an excuse, anything that could justify their actions. But there was none. The new police chief, the very man they had tied to a pole for fun, was now standing before them, his commanding presence making it clear that their careers were hanging by a thread. Chief Reynolds folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "James," he said, addressing the man beside him, What do you want to do about this? James took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders as he examined the two officers. The weight of the moment was pressing down on them all, but it was Travis and Cole who felt it the most. Beads of sweat formed on their brows as they awaited their fate. I want them in my office, James said simply, his voice firm. Reynolds nodded. You heard him. Let's go. The two officers hesitated for a moment before reluctantly obeying. The crowd, still in shock, whispered amongst themselves, with many recording the moment as Travis and Cole walked toward the black SUV with their heads down, no longer the cocky bullies they had been just minutes ago. As they climbed into the back seat, James and Reynolds took the front, and the car pulled away, leaving behind a neighborhood that would never forget what had just transpired. When they arrived at the police station, James walked in with a quiet authority that made every officer in the precinct stop what they were doing. The rumor had already spread like wildfire. Everyone now knew what had happened, and the station was thick with nervous energy. James didn't speak as he made his way to his new office, the room that, until today, had been occupied by Chief Reynolds. He gestured for Travis and Cole to sit in the two chairs across from his desk. The officers obeyed, their expressions a mix of dread and disbelief. James took his time, walking over to the window and staring out at the city. He had worked for years to get to this position. He had fought for justice, worked cases that no one else wanted, and built a reputation as a man who did not tolerate corruption. And now, before even settling into his role, he was dealing with two officers who represented everything he stood against. Finally, he turned to face them. Tell me, he said, leaning against the edge of his desk. What were you thinking? Travis cleared his throat, searching for words. Sir, Don't call me sir, James cut in. Call me what you called me earlier. Tall, black, and up to no good, wasn't it? Cole visibly flinched. Chief, we didn't know who you were. If we had... Oh, so if I were just another black man, it would have been fine. James shot back, his voice rising slightly. Would it have been funny then? The two officers said nothing. James let the silence linger before he shook his head. You know what disgusts me the most about this? It's not just the racism. It's the arrogance. The complete lack of regard for human dignity. You thought you could do whatever you wanted because you had badges and guns. You thought you were untouchable. He took a deep breath, reining in his anger. But here's the thing, you're not. Reynolds, who had been silently observing from the doorway, finally spoke. James, I want you to know that whatever decision you make here, I support it. James nodded. He already knew what needed to be done. I could fire you right now, James said, eyeing the two officers. And believe me, it would be justified. But firing you would be the easy way out. It would allow you to walk away without truly understanding the damage you've done. Travis and Cole exchanged uneasy glances. So here's what's going to happen, James continued. For the next 6 months, you will be reassigned to community service. You will be working directly with the very people you've spent your careers mistreating. You will be in black and brown neighborhoods, helping those you've looked down on. You will be assigned to outreach programs, mentoring young men who don't trust the police because of officers like you. And at the end of those 6 months, we will reevaluate whether you deserve to wear those badges at all. Travis's mouth opened slightly, as if to argue, but he wisely shut it. Cole simply looked down at his hands. Do you understand? James asked. Both officers nodded. Good. James stood up, straightening his tie. Dismissed. The officers stood quickly and left the office, their steps heavy with shame. Reynolds let out a low whistle. That was unexpected. James sighed. I don't just want them gone. I want them changed. Firing them won't fix the system. Reforming them might. Reynolds gave him a small smile. You're going to be one hell of a chief, James. James glanced at the door where Travis and Cole had just exited. I hope so, he said, because this city deserves better. The following weeks were filled with a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and, for some, resentment. The decision to keep Travis and Cole on the force under strict conditions had sparked heated discussions both inside and outside the police department. Some officers quietly supported the move, recognizing the need for accountability without immediate termination. Others, particularly those who had built their careers on unchecked authority, viewed James Carter as a disruptor, an outsider threatening their way of doing things. James was no fool. He knew that real change would come with resistance, and he was prepared for it. The media had picked up on the story, and within days, reports circulated about the new black police chief who had been publicly humiliated by two of his own officers. Some praised his response, calling it a brilliant way to force reform from within. Others criticized him, saying he should have fired Travis and Cole outright. But James didn't let the noise affect him. His focus remained on his mission, building a police force that truly served and protected everyone. The community's response was just as divided. While many saw James as a beacon of change, others were skeptical. They had seen promises before, only for things to stay the same. Some were outright angry, feeling that letting Travis and Cole keep their jobs was an insult to those who had suffered under police brutality for years. To address this, James did something no previous chief had done. He opened the doors of the precinct to the public. He held weekly town halls where citizens could voice their grievances directly to the officers. He implemented body camera audits and created a civilian oversight board, ensuring that complaints were investigated by people outside the department. At the first town hall, a man in his late 50s stood up and faced James. "You think you can fix this mess from the inside?" he asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "You're just one man." James nodded. "I am," he admitted. "But I'm not the only one who wants change. It's going to take all of us. Officers, citizens, leaders. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to hold me accountable, just like I'll hold my officers accountable." It wasn't an instant victory, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Travis and Cole had been thrown into the deep end of their new assignments. No longer patrolling the wealthier districts, they found themselves in communities they had previously only driven through. Now they were sitting in after-school programs, listening to teenagers talk about their fear of police. They were handing out food at shelters, hearing firsthand stories of how some officers had abused their power. For Cole, something changed. He began to realize how detached he had been from the reality of those he had sworn to protect. At one outreach program, a young black boy named Malik asked him, "Why do cops always think I'm a criminal?" Cole had no answer. But he started to listen. And for the first time in his career, he saw beyond the badge, beyond the authority. He saw people. Travis, however, resisted. He went through the motions but refused to acknowledge his wrongdoing. He still believed he had done nothing wrong, that James Carter's punishment was about politics rather than justice. He often complained to other officers, and while some agreed with him, others began to distance themselves. It was clear one man was changing. The other was not. Then, one evening, an incident occurred that forced a final reckoning. During a community patrol, Travis and Cole were responding to a call about a suspicious person outside a store. When they arrived, they saw a young black man in a hoodie sitting on the curb, scrolling through his phone. Travis immediately went into aggressive mode. "Get up. Hands where I can see them." Cole hesitated. "Travis, wait. We don't even know." "I said hands up." Travis barked. The young man, confused, complied. But Travis wasn't satisfied. He moved in, grabbing the teen's wrist roughly. That's when James arrived. He had been nearby, overseeing the officers' community patrols. When he saw what was happening, he immediately intervened. "Travis, stand down," James ordered. Travis turned, still holding the teen's arm. "Chief, this guy was acting." "I said stand down." James' voice left no room for argument. Travis hesitated, but eventually let go. The teen rubbed his wrist, shaken but unharmed. James turned to the boy. "You okay?" The teen nodded. "I was just waiting for my ride." James clenched his jaw. Then, slowly, he looked at Travis. "You're done." That night, Travis was officially fired. His refusal to change, his unwillingness to acknowledge his prejudices, had cost him his badge. Cole, on the other hand, completed his 6-month reassignment and continued working under James' leadership. He became a vocal advocate for training programs that emphasized de-escalation and community engagement. James' reforms were not perfect. There were still officers who resisted, still people who doubted him. But progress was being made. The department was changing. And more importantly, the city was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time things could be different.